Hi all, welcome. Another Gerton's Live, or Facebook Live, with me, Sean, the nursery manager. Last one for the season, just another quick reminder or just talking through some winter protection for your trees and shrubs. So we'll go ahead and take the first question.
A viewer has asked, I have 3 2-year-old evergreens that are turning brown now. Why is that, and is there anything I can do?
Evergreens turning brown at this time of the year could be a multitude of reasons. It could just be continuation lack of water from the drought conditions we've had all summer. It could be there could have been some sort of damage to root systems or introduction of some sort of chemicals into the root system. There's a number of reasons why. I would hold off on doing anything until you can go out to your tree and maybe just go out to a branch, take your thumbnail and just along the bark there, maybe just do a little scratch test. If you see under there, I scratched a little too much off, but if you see under there green, those branches are still alive. While those needles won't come back, the branches are still alive, and next spring hopefully you should see some new growth off the end of them. So that's a quick test you can do. If it's green, they're still going to be fine. Just let them be. If they're brown, you can continue to do scratch testing throughout the tree to see if it's the whole tree or not.
So another viewer is asking, last year I had something eating at the bark of my sand cherry. What's the best way to deter wildlife?
Yeah. Again, it's going to kind of depend on the plant itself and the wildlife that's going after the plant. There are a number of products out there, repellents out there. There are some that are formulated specifically for specific pests, and then there are some others that are more broad ranging. Favorite of mine is Repellex. This is a systemic repellent, and these are granules that you would just apply to the ground and then water in. It also comes in a tablet form that you just add the tablet to the water and then water the plants. But like I said, this is a systemic, so it gets introduced into the ground, uptaken by the root system, and then transported all throughout the plant. So when the deer, the rabbit, whomever comes along, takes a little nibble, they get that bad taste in their mouth and they don't come back for seconds. Like I said, the wonderful thing about this is that it is a systemic. You only have to apply it twice a year. Oftentimes with, well, I shouldn't say oftentimes, with the majority of the other repellents out on the market, they're in liquid form, they're in granular form, and they pretty much need to be reapplied every time it rains or snows. So a use of something like that while you're waiting for this to kick in would be great. But that alone probably isn't always enough. Certainly the use of a cage like this to go around shrubbery to keep rabbits away. The use of a rose cone, even if it's not a rose, if the plant's small enough to fit under a rose cone, something like this to help protect it. Or certainly tree protectors. If it's a purple leaf sand cherry tree, using something like this will obviously help protect that bark. It'll keep the rabbits, deer away from that bark. So all good options. Again, it's just kind of depend on what kind of tree you're trying to protect or plant you're trying to protect.
So which is better, using plastic protectors or tree wrap?
So my preference is the plastic protectors. The longer, more complicated answer is it really kind of depends on what you're trying to protect against and where in the yard your tree is. Protection from deer or rabbit or from sun and sun scald, this is going to be the better option. Deer, rabbits, they're going to just chew through the tree wrap because it's generally a paper product. We do sell a couple of plastic ones, but they're so thin that my own personal opinion is that they may be able to be chewed through pretty easily, and certainly the paper ones aren't going to do enough to protect it from a deer or a rabbit. The plastic tree guards will do a really good job of that. Yeah.
So someone else is asking, then what is the tree wrap for?
Good question. I'm not really, so again, that kind of, my own personal preference would always be to this. I don't, again, this is just me, my own personal opinion. I'm not too sure of what the purpose of the tree wrap is. I think, again, like I started out saying, is that the protection you use, whether it's a plastic tree guard or the tree wrap, can vary depending on where in the yard it is and what we're trying to protect against. If you're not concerned about deer and you're not concerned about rabbits, and the tree is going to be on the has an eastern exposure or a northern exposure where it's not going to get a lot of intense winter afternoon sun, then using a paper tree wrap just to help protect the trunk of the tree, the bark of the tree through the winter, is a perfectly great use for it. Again, if it's going to be on that south or southwest or western side of the house, have exposure to that late afternoon winter sun, the tree protector is going to be the best for that, the plastic one, because it's going to leave, ideally, so this is a 4-inch guard. We sell them in 2-inch, 3-inch, and 4-inch. Ideally, you would use this on up to maybe like a 3.5-inch trunk, so there would still be some airspace in there, keeping that air temperature around the bark at a constant temperature.
So a viewer is asking, I have a hydrangea shrub that needs pruning. Can I do that now?
Yes and no. It depends on what kind of hydrangea shrub you have. The 4 different varieties we sell here all have 4 different requirements in terms of their pruning or non-pruning, when it's done and how much it's done. The short answer is that at this point, without knowing what kind of hydrangea it is that you have, the most I would do is to prune off the flower heads, the spent blooms. You don't have to. They can certainly stay on all winter long. They don't do any harm to the plant and provide some food source for birds. But if you do want to prune them off, you can do so, doing so about an inch below where that blossom head is coming off the branch. Anything further at this point, I would really hold off on doing until you figure out which kind of hydrangea you have.
A viewer said, I heard we're supposed to have more cold and snow again this year. Can I pile snow up around my newly planted maple tree to protect it?
You certainly could. That added insulation or layer of insulation from the snow would be good. I would probably suggest using layers of leaves or straw or something organic like that to really help build up that insulation versus the snow, but the snow would do in a pinch.
How much is wind a factor in tree protection? Does it make a difference how old the tree is?
It does. Wind is a major factor, again, depending on type of tree we're talking about and placement in the yard and what. So again, if it's going to have that western exposure, a lot of our wind's going to be coming from the west. So not only is it going to be getting that sun, but it's going to be getting that wind too. Is it an evergreen? Is it a deciduous tree? So either burlapping or using a tree protector. Again, something much like the use of the paper tree wrap versus the plastic tree protector. If it's on the eastern exposure or a northern exposure, maybe blocked by the western wind by the house or something like that, probably less important to do anything. Certainly more important with evergreens to do some sort of protecting for wind than it is with deciduous trees. Younger deciduous trees, if you feel like it's in a super windy exposed area, the use of a stake or something like that to help aid it get through the winter would be okay.
You might have mentioned this, but what trees are most susceptible to Sunscald?
Yeah, so Sunscald is, in my last Facebook Live, I talked about winter burn on evergreens and how that's caused by the cells waking up from that late afternoon sun. Same idea with Sunscald. It's going to be that late afternoon sun, and it's actually not the sun directly off from the sky, it's that sun bouncing off the snow and then hitting either the bark of a deciduous tree or the leaflets or needles of a evergreen. Again, it heats those cells up, it wakes those cells up, and then they freeze back up at night, causes the winter burn on evergreens, and then causes cracking on deciduous trees, hence the sunscald. Most susceptible are going to be maples and fruit trees, whether that's a crabapple or a true apple or any of the other fruit trees we carry. Any young tree, any tree 5 years or younger is going to have a little bit thinner bark. Throwing a tree protector on there wouldn't be the worst idea, even if it's not the most susceptible to sunscald.
And bouncing off that question, can sunscald be repaired?
So if your tree does get sunscald, there is nothing that you can do or gonna want to do in terms of trying to help it be repaired. Plants in general are incredibly resilient, but trees do heal themselves up. There's trees all over. If you go up to a tree, you can often find old wounds that have healed themselves up, scarred over. It looks like a little bit more of a rounded edge to it, kind of coming into the lower exposed trunk. It will heal itself over time. Just keeping it free of moisture would be the only advisable thing.
Taylor on the line is asking, is now a good time to move the juniper I planted 3 years ago?
I would not, no. I would wait until spring. With evergreens at this point of the season, so the University of Minnesota Extension Service, their recommendation is don't plant evergreens after, I think it's September 30th, I believe. We've been still selling them and planting them ourselves through our own service, but at this point of the season, it's really pushing it. They just take longer to get rooted in, and so if it's happy in terms of its health and all of that in its location right now, I would hold off and wait until spring and do it at that point when it has that whole growing season to get rooted in and happy.
I heard the term dieback. Can you explain what that is?
I can. So when I hear the term dieback, through all my learning, schooling, and all of that, like I always thought of like fatal dieback, right, where you're seeing like browning on a exterior branch and then going all the way back into the interior, or from a top down or a bottom up, a very kind of distinct look to it. The dieback that just through working here that is what people are most commonly referring to is just the natural dieback that happens on any evergreen yearly. As you can see here, we've got the exterior of this DeGroots arborvitae. It's, I don't know, maybe probably a 25-year-old tree, but good healthy tree, nice and green, but not more than an inch or two into this tree, we're starting to see brown and almost dead leaflets. And then we look even further in and we really don't see much of anything. We see some little green trying to grow in there, but we don't see anything in there really. That's just natural dieback. Again, because of the density of the exterior of the canopy or the leaflets here, right? Sunlight isn't getting into those interior places, or very minimal sunlight is getting into those locations. And so the tree no longer needs those leaflets to produce the chlorophyll that it needs to survive. So it basically tells itself these are useless and just kind of drops them. You'll also see on these techniques behind me, some of that is, they're coned out right now, the browning, but some of that browning in there is just a yearly or biannual kind of shedding of leaflets that happens. It's not uncommon for arborvitaes, for pines, some varieties of spruce to have an annual, biannual kind of dropping of needles. Nothing to be concerned about if that's what you're seeing. If it is something more where it's an entire branch or an entire section of a tree, something more serious might be going on there.
So viewer says, I have a large lilac that's halfway under the roof line of my porch. Last year it was loaded with icicles. What can I do to protect it?
Yeah. making sure, the first step would just be making sure that the lilac tree has been pruned so that it's not touching that. Now, that's not going to stop water from falling from the gutters or the roof and creating icicles on the tree itself, but that will ease it a little bit. The only other thing I would really recommend or can think of would be probably wrapping it in burlap. It would be able to, I guess, kind of keep that canopy or shape of the shrub in place and prevent any icicles from weighing down branches and breaking branches. On my last Facebook Live, I talked about wrapping evergreens in burlap and how you don't want to actually wrap the plant itself with it, that you want to allow for airflow in there to allow for that even temperature throughout. In this specific instance, I think wrapping the branches itself would be acceptable. It's a deciduous plant, so it's asleep for the winter, and I think it would, again, help kind of keep that shape and prevent any branches from breaking.
Can you recommend an effective deer repellent?
Again, I go back to the Repellex. It's probably going to be, again, it's my go-to. Certainly, like I mentioned before when I was talking about it, we do have a number of other products. Some are kind of more broad spectrum repellents. We do sell at least 3, I believe, that are formulated specifically for deer and rabbits. But yeah, certainly those sprays and granules can be effective, but like I said, you do have to reapply.
So you already mentioned the repellent, but aside from tree wraps, what else might I do to deter mice from munching on my shrubs?
Yeah, that's a tough one. You know, we can't go to like a cage or a wire or anything because the mice are just going to get right through. I mean, the use of if it's something small enough, again, the use of a rose cone might do the trick. Again, mice are pretty resilient and rascally. If they want to get in after some food, they're going to get in after some food. Other than repellents, I'm not sure. I'm not sure there's a real good mouse deterrent. You could certainly use this or wrapping the plants in burlap using the staking method I talked about last time of wrapping the stakes and maybe putting some mouse traps down in there with it. But beyond that, not a whole lot specifically for mice beyond a repellent.
When using hardware cloth, how far should I dig it down around my tree to protect it from rabbits?
So, unless they're really, really hungry, they're not going to go through too much trouble to get at the plant. I would think maybe just an inch or so below the soil would be more than sufficient, if even necessary, to go that deep.
How high should hardware cloth be to deter deer?
Good. So yeah, again, I mean, same with both the rabbits and deer. For them, it's like path of least resistance. The deer aren't going to do a whole lot in terms of jumping up to try and get stuff or to really scrounge around on the ground. Well, take the ground part away, but they're not going to really go for high stuff. They're going to predominantly just eat, if we're talking a tree or shrub, it's going to be kind of at that head height, somewhere in that 4 to 7 foot range. They're just going to be kind of walking along and just munching as they go. That said, if there's a lack of food around, they might try and go for stuff higher, but generally kind of in that 4 to 7 foot range is where they're going to be munching.
If a branch has been broken due to ice damage, can I prune it out right away?
Yes, absolutely. I would even recommend doing so. For the majority of trees, pruning is recommended to be done in the late winter, so kind of February through early March. The reason being the tree is dormant, everything is still frozen, so there aren't any funguses or bacteria flying around, there aren't any insects flying around, right? And so then as the tree comes out of dormancy, it just goes ahead and heals over those prunes, and you're all set to go for that season. So doing the same thing earlier in the winter, even though it's not in that ideal pruning time, you wouldn't be doing any harm to the tree itself, again, for all those same reasons. It's asleep, there aren't going to be any fungal issues or insect issues to worry about.
And last question, can we still plant trees and shrubs?
Certainly can. Again, like I mentioned earlier, if it's an evergreen, I'd really suggest holding off until spring. Depending on your location, you might be able to get away with doing an evergreen at this point, right? Again, if you're like in St. Paul, Minneapolis core, more of a zone 5, it's going to be close to the house. Maybe there's a chance, but I would really strongly recommend wait until spring. The remainder of the deciduous shrubs and trees could be planted all the way up until the ground's frozen. Especially with the trees, once that tree is dormant, it's sitting in the pot or it's sitting in the ground until next spring when it wakes up again. Doesn't really matter to the tree. It's probably better for it to wake up in that ground and start going right away in the spring. Yeah.
Would you recommend a root stimulator?
So at this point, probably not, because again, you're not necessarily looking to get them to get rooted in. And again, most of them are pretty close to dormant at this point, or getting there. So there won't be much growth of any sort, and any little bit of growth that they do, I think they'd be fine, without. So that's all the time I have for today. Thanks for joining me for another Facebook Live here in the nursery lot. That'll probably be the last one for me from the nursery. Look forward to seeing you next spring. Thanks.